Hi, folks. Tom Lee here. I rep Macmillan for the Upper Midwest, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, part of Wisconsin, and I'll be talking to you about 9 titles in 10 minutes, so I will try to make it through. I'll be talking to you about 8 noteworthy winter titles, and I do want to start with a really great fall title that I think is really timely and needed. That is The Book of Hope by Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams, coming October 9th from Celadon. This is the next entry in the Global Masters series. The last book was a few years ago. It was the Dalai Lama's Book of Joy, which did fantastically well. This book from Jane Goodall is a series of conversations between her and Douglas Abrams about what Jane calls one of the most sought after but least truly understood of the human emotions, and that is hope. And if there's a time we need a deeper understanding of hope, this is it. As she states, indeed, these are dark times, and yes, I do believe there is evil among us, but how much more powerful are the voices that stand up against evil? She outlines what she calls the 4 pillars of hope: human intellect, youth and how we evolve, resilience, and above all, the indomitable human spirit. This book is a beautiful package, a great gift, 8x5 trim. I would advise you to order long to avoid the pesky supply chain issues that are daunting all publishers this fall. It's already had a Starred PW review, and we just found out there's a confirmed CBS Sunday Morning on October 17th, 2 days before publication. Highly recommend this book. And now, winter 2022. I'm going to start with 2 nonfiction titles. They're very self-help oriented because I feel, and I have heard from both customers and friends, there's a really pressing need for these types of books these days. And with counselors or therapists booked out or not seeing new clients, there's still a need for answers. And where better to turn but books? So, first book, Unstuck, from the publisher Media Lab, coming March 8th by Leah Garvin, who is a leadership coach, aimed at a female audience. Now, this is primarily a business title, but I do want to point out it's very applicable to everyday life, so I urge also viewing it as psych self-help. It's very transferable. She talks about the concept of reframing, the general idea of looking at and thinking of beliefs or ideas or relationships in a new and different way in order to effect positive change. This is true in many contexts. She also points out this has huge ramifications when seeking to counter unconscious bias and create a more inclusive world. The key is being consultative and empathetic, and in her view, offering constructive feedback should be direct, but helpful and empathetic and not bad-tasting medicine. Above all, show that you care personally. I recommend this highly. And this feeds very nicely into my next title, which is called Tell Me More About That. From a relatively new publisher we're distributing, Page 2. This is coming in February by the author Rob Volpe. This is much more in the traditional self-help bailiwick. Empathy is in very short supply. It's almost an endangered species of how we relate to others these days. Over 1/3 of Americans surveyed say they could not accept viewpoints other than their own. Only 1/3? I wonder if that number is actually higher. But this has to change. He outlines a 5-step path to empathy. It sounds simple, but think about it. It's how independent booksellers, for example, engage with customers day after day after day. You turn what could be a transactional conversation into one that explores shared connections. And before you know it, you're talking as friends, even though you may not share the same views. So from there, some great fiction titles. First one is The Christie Affair, coming from St. Martin's in February, by Nina de Gramont, author of 2 well-reviewed novels from Algonquin previously. This one is a wonderful read. It has that sweet spot appeal to readers of both literary and page-turner fiction. It's a reimagining of the 11-day disappearance of Agatha Christie in 1926. Very historical, very speculative, very, very well-developed characters. And this disappearance is something that to her dying day, Agatha Christie ever refused to discuss. So it's a speculative reimagining of what may have happened. And I must also point out, this is the first new author that St. Martin's editor, Jennifer Enderlin, has acquired in 5 years. And as you may know, Jen is the editor who brought Kristen Hanna to Macmillan. So we have great hopes for this. And you may have seen a really nice marketing package go around. Next title, Pure Color, also coming in February from the publisher FSG by Sheila Heti, author of the well-reviewed Motherhood. This is centered around a woman coping with the death of her father. His spirit joins with hers and they become a leaf on a tree. Remember, speculative fiction. Eventually, she misses the life she left behind and wants to return. There's a lot here about grieving, but it also has a lightness and grace as well as a definite gravitas. Very much for readers of Rachel Cusk and Sigrid Nunez. Next title, The Devil House, coming from the FSG imprint MCD Books in late January by John Darnielle, who you likely remember as the author of Universal Harvester, which was a bookseller favorite a few years ago. This one, however, is a bigger book. It's more expansive, it's creepy, it's complex, multi-layered, a lot of stories within stories, and has this weird silent patient sort of underlying creepiness or just something not quite right. It's centered around a true crime writer who's been given a big break to live in a house where a notorious double murder occurred in the 1980s and to write about it. But somewhat like in Universal Harvester, he finds himself, against his will, drawn into more and more unsettling events that show the story is not really over, and you too will feel yourself pulled in. Then one of my favorites, Four Treasures of the Sky, coming from Flatiron in April by Jenny Zong. She has an MFA in writing from the University of Wyoming. Several things. This is a noteworthy and important debut literary novel. The editor is Caroline Blakey, who is the editor of Charlotte McConaughey's Once There Were Wolves and Migrations, both wonderful books. This book already has a great endorsement from Ann Patchett. And this does what fiction can really do well. Bring a chapter of history to life, place it front and center in readers' minds, and plant that question, why did we not know more about this beforehand? Specifics, this was inspired by a real event in 1885. 5 Chinese men were lynched for the alleged murder of a white shopkeeper in Idaho. It came on the heels of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the long simmering hatreds that were stirred up by the inflammatory rhetoric of public officials. Gee, sound familiar? The novel centers around a Chinese woman, Dayu, who is smuggled into the US and forced to keep reinventing herself against much adversity in order to survive. Wonderful story. Origin story of this book, Jenny was inspired to write this after her father came across a plaque in Idaho and asked his daughter to imagine the story and to write about it. Next up, Olga Dies Dreaming, also coming in from Flatiron Books, this time in January, by the Iowa Workshop grad Xochitl Gonzalez. Apologies if I mispronounce that. Already lots of love from many quarters, drawing comparisons to Emma Straub, Nathan Hill, Naima Koster. A young woman in Brooklyn from a lower socioeconomic background, seeking to make a meaningful difference in the world while achieving the American dream. Fast forward to 2017, she and her brother have indeed come up into different kinds of prestigious positions. He's a congressman, she's an upscale wedding planner in New York. Then there's the devastation of Hurricane Maria as it slams into Puerto Rico, and that proves the catalyst for Olga having to face up to a lot of trauma from her childhood when she was abandoned by her parents, who were political activists. Not to make light at all, but this is a veritable hurricane of self-discovery and self-realization between covers of this book. And from there, I'll finish with, on the kids' side, an amazing kids' picture book, I Am Golden by Eva Chen, coming in early January from Feiwel and Friends. This is such a wonderful book. It's an extraordinarily moving ode to the immigrant experience, in particular, the richness and unique texture of her Chinese American upbringing. The illustrator is the marvelous Sophie Dao, Previously, she's illustrated Sarah and the Big Wave, and one of my favorite picture books, I Am the Wind. It's told to a little girl by her parents. The overarching message is about loving who you are, where you came from, and loving all that makes you unique, both as an individual and a cultural being. Think on the night you were born, or you're here for a reason, but speaking to a diverse readership. And with that, I thank you very much.